Okay.
And Mayor Ellen, it is 5 o'clock, so you may start the meeting when you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Can I have a mover and seconder to call the meeting to order? Councillor Maude Chapman, Deputy Mayor Colgan, that the special meeting of the Council of the Township of Springwater of May 18, 2022 come to order at 5 p.m. All those in favor? That is carried. Due to COVID, Council continues to take necessary steps to limit in-person meetings. We are therefore doing a Zoom meeting virtually. You can watch the meeting live on the Township's website at www.springwater.ca, or you can listen to the meeting live from a telephone or cellular device by calling 647-558-0588 and using the ID 853-5858-5899. And this option is available during the meeting, and those unable to watch or listen can see the live stream, which is recorded. The video is on the Township's YouTube channel. Are there any disclosure of pecuniary interests, Council? Next, at 3.1, we have the previous minutes of the Finance and Audit Advisory Committee meeting way back January 27, 2021. Can I have a mover and seconder to approve the previous minutes? Councillor Maude Chapman, Deputy Mayor Coghlan, that the January 27, 2021 minutes of the Township of Springwater Finance and Audit Advisory Committee be approved as presented. All those in favor? That is carried. At 4.1 in the agenda, I now call upon Ms. Joanna Park, CPA and partner at Baker Tilly KDN LLP, to present to us the 2021 Draft Audit Consolidated Financial Statement presentation. Welcome, Joanna.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I have a presentation here. I know you have lots of items that you've received from me in your agenda package. I'm going to go through our presentation, but happy, of course, to address any questions that are in the other items as well. But this is a summary of the main items that you have in your package. So I'm just going to share my screen here. And hopefully you are seeing the presentation.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect, thank you. It looks okay. It's big enough. I think that's as big as I can get it. So hopefully.
Yes, no, that's good. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So like I said, this is a summary of the financial statement as well as that post-audit letter that's also included in your package. Oh, okay. So we start with the auditor's report. That's really the main thing that you've hired us to do, is to give a report on your financial statements. And what we've done here is we've reproduced the second paragraph of the auditor's report. The auditor's report is 2 pages long, but this is really what you want to see. And it says, in our opinion, the accompanying consolidated financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the township at December 31st, 2021. And your financial statements are in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards, which you as a municipality are the standards that you have to follow. So that is a clean opinion. That's what you wanted to see. We go through a little bit to let council know what we've done as part of our audit. We review council minutes. We make sure that any financial decisions are reflected in the financial records and therefore the financial statements of the township. We do substantive testing. We do random sampling, statistical sampling, analytical review. We look at management's estimates to make sure that they are reasonable. We do documentation and control testing on your main systems, being your revenues, your disbursements, payroll, journal entries. So kind of gives you a snapshot of what we do as part of the audit. The audit is complete pending council's approval of the financial statements. And then once that happens, then we ask management to sign a representation letter, just as their recognition that they've provided us everything we've needed to do the audit. And I do have their receipt of legal letters, but as of half an hour ago, we got the last legal letter. So we are good to go on that front. And that's just confirmation from your lawyers that whether there's any outstanding claims and whether they need to be recorded or noted in the financial statements. So that's what that's all about. We didn't have any significant difficulties or any difficulties encountered during the audit. It was great. All things considered, it was your virtual audit. And that's not easy for your staff, and it's not easy for our team either. But we got there, and you know what, it went really well. So obviously we're all getting used to this. As much as we don't want to, we would much rather, believe it or not, the accountants and the auditors are people, and we would like to be in person and see people, but we're able to make this work for now. There was no changes to our initial audit plan, no disagreements or difficulties with management, and excellent cooperation. And that's something we've definitely come to expect from the Township of Springwater, which is great. We do have an uncertainty note, which is not so new now. It's the second year to have that, but just the impacts caused by COVID. And the last item there, before we get into numbers, there was no uncorrected audit differences noted. So that's a good thing. Then what we've done, instead of just having the whole set of financial statements all on one slide, so it's lots of numbers and too much to handle, we've broken it down into segments. So these are your financial assets. So these are the assets that can easily be converted into cash, plus your cash and investments as well. So, and we do a 5-year trend, just so you can kind of see what the trend is. And then we have a kind of picture representation. So in total, 2021, the total financial assets are $38 million. A significant increase in your cash, and that's just because of the surplus that you have at the end of the year, as well as some extra money in your obligatory reserve funds, which we're going to see as we go through the financial statements. You have $12 million in investments, and that's all in the one fund investment, or for the most part. There's a tiny GIC as well, but most of that's in the one fund investments. You have trade and other receivables. That's just timing of when your HST, your grants, all that come in that related to 2021. That just hadn't been received at the end of December. And then your taxes receivable. This is one to note for sure. You'll see the kind of the trend, but in 2021, your taxes receivable are the lowest they've been in the last 5 years, which is pretty remarkable, all things considered with the economy right now. So the ministry, their guideline is to have about 10% or lower, and that's a 10% percentage compared to your total levy. In 2020, you were at 9.5%. And in 2021, you're around 7%. So that's a great percentage compared to the, that standard that the province has put in. And then the next slide, just in case everyone says pictures are easier to see. So here's the pictures of your graph of your assets and just the trends over the years. The next slide is your financial liabilities, the amounts owing at the end of December. Your accounts payable and accrued liabilities, again, that's just timing. But the one thing that is in there is with all the development going on, you do have more developer deposits. And so they sit as accounts payable at the end of the year. So the deposits are there, and then as money is spent, it's reduced over the project. Your deferred revenue obligatory reserve funds, that's everything from your development charges, your Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, COVID relief funding, your parkland fees, and then your gas tax funding too. So the big amounts in that 7.6 million are 4.5 million in development charges and 1.7 million in your federal gas tax funds. So that's money that you've received that you'll spend on future projects. Your deferred revenue, that's just grant revenue that you've received. Actually, most of it's overpayment of water and sewer. So that's money you've received and that will be applied to future billings. And then your long-term debt, just the reduction based on the principal payments, no new debt this year. And again, you can see the graph there. The one on the far left is your accounts payable and accrued liabilities. So that's just going to change depending on the timing and the projects going on. And then your deferred revenue obligatory reserve funds, the orange is the other big one there too. And the long-term debt is your yellow, so you can see it going down over the years. This just summarizes when you take your financial assets minus your financial liabilities, you get your net financial assets of $7.2 million, so a nice increase from the prior year. And then your non-financial assets, typically these are the largest numbers on your statement of financial position. Your tangible capital assets of $158 million. You had slightly more additions than you did amortization, and we're going to see the breakdown of those additions in a couple of slides, but $158 million, and that's the net book value. So that's the historical cost of your capital assets minus any amortization. So when you add your net financial assets plus your non-financial assets, you get your accumulated surplus of $175 million, and we'll see the breakdown of that in further slides. And again, this is showing, again, that $175 million as your accumulated surplus, looking at it from the statement of operations purview, your total revenues, and we're going to see the breakdown, of course, 30 million, your total expenses being 25 million, to give a PSAB annual surplus of 5.2 million, to give you that accumulated surplus at the end of the year of 175 million. And then just looking at a comparison of that 175 million in your accumulated surplus, how much of it is invested in capital assets? And you can see the blue is the amount invested in capital assets versus the orange accumulated surplus. So a lot of your accumulated surplus is the amount invested in capital assets. The rest is your reserves and reserve funds. And again, we'll see the breakdown. And then looking at your total revenues less your total revenues compared to your expenses and your annual surplus, and just seeing the trend over the years. Very similar. A lot of times, if you get a lot of capital funding, you're going to see that revenue spike because, of course, the capital will be amortized over a useful life as opposed to being expensed in that year of acquisition. This is a lot of numbers, a lot of revenues there and sources of different revenues. But in total, you had budgeted 33 million. Actual revenues came out about 30 million. You'll see the largest number there being your property taxation, the top one, 16 million, slightly a little bit over budget because of supplementary taxes. Other key items in there, your user charges. You did have an increase in your building permits during 2021, which we're seeing, definitely the trend up there in 2021. So that accounted for a little bit of that increase in your user charges from the prior year as well as budget. Your province of Ontario, most of that is your OMPF funding. The other item to note here is your other revenue increase, and that's because of a large contribution for development of $900,000. So that's what's in there in other. And then your developer contributions earned and parkland fees earned and federal gas tax earned, that's the amount that was spent during the year. And then the amounts I mentioned in the previous slides are the amount that you still have on hand to spend in future periods. So that amounted to about $30 million in your total revenues. And then just to see the breakdown of where you get your sources of revenue from, 53% being from property taxation and 22% from user charges. So your rate payers there accounting for about 75% of your revenue. And then looking at your expenses, PSAB requires us to show expenses in two different ways. This is the first one by the type of department, more or less, the general government, protection, transportation. As expected, your recreation and cultural services being down compared to budget, similar to last year, of course, but with COVID, there was definitely decreases in the amount of programs and services that you were able to provide during the year. I will make this is my typical auditor joke, health services. I don't make up the classifications, it's made up by the province, but your health services category, that's your cemetery, ironically. So in case you're wondering what would be in that category there. I know it's smaller, but it usually begs a question there. What is that? So in total, your budgeted was $28 million for expenses, and you came in about $25.1 million in expenses. And then again, just showing the graph. So the largest expense being your transportation services as expected, your protection 23.6, and that includes your building as well as any policing, fire, all those services, and then environmental 15.9, and that would include your water and wastewater. If you're ever wondering what's in these categories, in the notes to the financial statements, there is definitions of each category that are all identified in there in your segmented disclosure. The other type of, we show the exact same expenses, $25.1 million, but this is more by the type of expenses. So your salaries and benefits being your largest type of expense, $8.8 million under budget, but of course, a lot of that has to do with your parks, your rec programs, your rec facilities. And then the associated materials that went with those, you see that under materials, under budget again. And that's just, it was a difficult year to budget, that's for sure, not knowing what was going to happen during the course of 2021. And then again, a breakdown of your types again. So 35.2% is salaries and benefits. That's pretty similar. We compare this to our other municipal clients, and it doesn't matter what size. You know, I have tiny little lower tier municipalities, and we do cities as well. And it's usually somewhere around there, except for, when there's large projects that then, but generally speaking, they're usually around 32 to 35%. And then we talked about the accumulated surplus of $175.8 million. This is what is made up of this. So we see the top section, the amount invested in capital assets, that's the net book value of your capital assets, less your long-term debt associated with those assets, as well as you have about $2 million in unfunded road projects at the moment. You do have a township surplus. I know your treasurer brought forward a motion recently to transfer all your surplus into reserves because of just calculation issue between just as we are working through that. Anyway, it ended up with $169,000 remaining surplus. Not the worst problem in the world to have, but there is and I believe the treasurer does have a motion coming forward to transfer it as well. So there is a remaining surplus. We went through our numbers and compared them, and that's how it ended up. The municipal drains does have an accumulated deficit of 236,000. So in total there, you have 152 million, and then the remaining of the 175 million is in reserves and reserve funds, $23.5 million. And you can see the increases there that council has already approved to the $1.2 million to go into reserves already from the initial calculation of the surplus. So that's all reflected in these statements. And then to see the graph just of how the reserves have changed, not a lot of change, a little trend there, definitely towards the positive, which is good to see. And of course, that's just going to depend on, the use of those assets is going to, or of the reserves is going to depend on your asset management plan in the future. And then we talked about capital asset additions. You had about $6.5 million in additions during the year, $2.8 million in roads projects, $2.1 million in your sewers, as well as some vehicles, machinery, equipment, a little bit in buildings and some books in your library. And the other thing to kind of step back every once in a while and look at is just your rate of adding to your capital assets versus the amortization. It's important to make sure that on average, and you're obviously doing this every year, but your additions are greater than your amortization. The amortization is based on the historical cost of the assets, but of course now as you're replacing them, the cost of the assets are getting increasingly more and more expensive. So you just want to make sure that's one sure way to ensure, well, I shouldn't say to ensure, but help to avoid the capital deficit issue that a lot of municipalities, or infrastructure deficit that a lot of municipalities face. And then looking at the average useful life by type of asset too. And this is an overall picture. It just gives a little snapshot. Furnitures and fixtures, those are items that, they usually hang on a lot longer than their useful life is. So it's not so bad that 93% of your furnitures and fixtures are fully amortized. But something like your buildings, where you're going to have them and they're a little more substantial there, only 37% are amortized and 63% of useful life remaining. So, and that's really just a snapshot. There's a lot of stories within those numbers for sure. And then just the last slide here looks at your net financial asset trend. This year with your surpluses and everything, nice increase there from 2020 to 2021. And we saw that's your financial assets minus your financial liabilities. And that is the end of our presentation. And if I can get my screen back, I will stop sharing.
The presentation screen is still up.
Yeah, sorry, Mary Ellen, I am working on that. I just have to get my Zoom meeting back. And that's you all.
I'll let you keep doing that.
Yes, sorry.
Can I have a mover and seconder to get this on the floor, please? Deputy Mayor Coughlin, Councillor Moore, Councillor Cabral. First of all, before I go to comments, thank you very much for the presentation. Certainly, it was a challenging year.
Don's got me on hold here for a second, Jack.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Pardon?
Am I allowed to speak, Mayor? Just to let you know that Councillor Han has rang through. He's having internet difficulties connecting, but he's going to keep trying. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Cabral. So certainly glad to hear that it was a smooth audit. And thank you to Director Radigan and her staff, and to your team, Joanna, for making it run smoothly. So open it for comments, Council. There, now I can see everybody.
Thank you to whoever helped me. I couldn't get it, so thank you.
The recommendation speaks to the additional surplus of 169,510. Can you review that again, please?
Yes, there was, when your Director of Finance and I were going through the financial statements, we had thought we had identified everything going into that surplus, but there ended up being an additional 169,000. It had something to do with the budgeting numbers and the numbers that were being brought into the spreadsheet. So I apologize that the Director and I had gone over those numbers, and it ended up being that was the additional amounts going forward.
So this is a proposed additional amount to what we talked about last council meeting as a surplus, and it is being proposed to go into the tax rate stabilization reserve.
Correct.
Okay. Comments, council? Questions? Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just wondering if, through you to Director Radigan, if she or I'm sorry, Joanna Park might be able to provide the final figure, today's figure, in addition to the excess that was discussed at the last meeting that went into the tax stabilization fund as well, most of it.
Director Radigan.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to Councillor Cabral. To clarify, are you looking for the balance of the tax rate stabilization or the total surplus for 2021?
Total surplus, I believe.
Total surplus.
Thank you. Mayor Allen, through you to Councillor Cabral. The total surplus for 2021 was $1,346,428.
Okay. All right, then. I'm not seeing any other comments, so certainly everything was well laid out, and a lot of material to go through, but it's not the first time we've done that. So that's, as I say, a good year. So can I have a mover and seconder to accept the motion that the presentation from Joanna Park, partner Baker Tilly, KDN LLP, regarding the results of the 2021 draft audit consolidated financial statement be received, and that the remaining 2021 surplus be allocated to the tax rate stabilization reserve? We had a mover and seconder on that. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Moving on to 5.1, which is the 2021 reserves and reserve fund statement. I'll turn that over to Director Radigan to start the discussion on this.
Thank you, Mayor Allen and Deputy Mayor Coughlin, through you to members of council. I'll start with speaking to both 5.1 and 5.2, if that's okay, since they are quite similar in nature. The reserve and the reserve fund statement includes development charges. Sorry, just give me 1 second. The reserve and reserve fund statement includes the development charges, as well as the township's other reserves and reserve funds, such as the water and wastewater reserve funds, as well as other discretionary reserve funds. The statement provides a continuity schedule that is maintained by staff throughout the year and is presented to council on an annual basis, identifying the balance of all of the township's reserve and reserve funds at year end. The 2021 year-end balance within the township's reserve and reserve fund equates to $31.2 million. Now, the statement of development charges and cash in lieu of parkland, they are a requirement of the DC Act as well as the Planning Act, and they simply show the ins and outs of the DCs and cash in lieu of parkland that has been collected in the year and allocated to capital as well throughout the year. The regulations stipulate that obligatory reserve funds, which include development charges, revenue can only be recognized as expenditures are incurred. The report provides a year-end summary of the development charge reserve fund, which balances to approximately $4.5 million. Now, this includes approximately 4.2 in outstanding commitments at the end of December 31st, 2021. The cash in lieu of parkland has a balance of approximately 694,000, and that's at the end of December 31st, 2021. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any questions or comments with respect to these? Okay, seeing none, then can I have at 5.1, the 2021 reserves and reserve fund statements, can I have a mover and seconder to for this motion, please? Councillor Cabral and Councillor Ma Chapman, that the 2021 reserves and reserve fund statements be received as information. All those in favor? That is carried. And at 5.2, can I have a mover and seconder to receive the 2021 statement of development charge and cash in lieu of parkland reserve funds? Councillor Cabral and Deputy Mayor Coughlin. And the motion is that the report from the Director of Finance regarding the 2021 statement of development charge and cash in lieu of parkland reserve funds dated May 18th, 2022 be received, and that in accordance with Section 43 of the Development Charges Act 1997 and Section 42 of the Planning Act, that the staff report entitled 2021 Statement of Development Charges and Cash in lieu of Parkland Reserve Funds and its appendices be submitted to Council for approval and sent to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. All those in favor? That is carried. The confirmatory bylaw, mover and seconder, please. Councillor Cabral, Councillor Moore, that bylaw 2022-038 to confirm and adopt the proceedings of council at the special meeting held on May 18th, 2022, listed herein be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. All those in favor? That is carried. And adjournment of this special meeting, mover and seconder, please. Councillor Ma Chapman, Deputy Mayor Coughlin, that special meeting of the Township of Springwater does now adjourn at 5:27 p.m. to meet again in the regular meeting on May 18th, 2022 at 6:30 p.m. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you, Joanna, and thank you, Director Radigan.